I've chosen wisely.
I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
Hold your potato!
Fortune and glory, kid.
I suddenly remembered my Charlemagne.
That belongs in a museum.
You know how to fly, don't you?
Prepare to meet Kali in hell.
Archaeology is the search for fact.
Oh, your teacher.
Good thing we're not grave robbers.
You call this archaeology?
Obtainer of rare antiquity.
Henry Jones Jr.
You call him Dr. Jones!
Dr. Jones.
Dr. Jones.
Dr. Jones? Dr. Jones? Jr.
Indiana.
We named the dog Indiana. Jones?
Indiana Jones.
It's not the years. It's the mileage.
42 years and many miles you've been with us, Indy, and your latest adventure was just as sweet. This is the Star Wars Station, but today you may think that you're listening to Indiana Jones Station. That's because you are, because we are so excited to bring you our review of Star Wars' cousin, the latest Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And fun fact, this is the first ever movie review on this channel. So we haven't had the opportunity to review a Star Wars movie yet. So the very first review that you're getting is an Indiana Jones review. It was a great event. We went and celebrated my birthday. We had a little Star Wars Station meetup. We posted that picture on our story. We posted our rapid reactions over on Patreon. And we just had an awesome time because going to an Indiana Jones movie, going to any Lucasfilm movie, is such an event. You know, you spend all day thinking about it, feeling the movie, getting ready, having so much anticipation build up. It's a feeling that the Disney Plus TV shows or even other movies can't really replicate, because when you're going to see a Lucasfilm production, your brain is occupied about that all day long. That's all you think about. And that's all I thought about. And I guarantee that is all my dear co-host thought about. And so, without further ado, it is the adventuring archaeologist himself, Colin Archer.
Hey, Carter, thanks. This is going to be a great episode. We had a great day watching that movie. And exactly like you said, that Indiana Jones thing was playing in my head literally all day, from the moment I wake up to into the next. I'm still thinking about scenes from that movie. It was so fun.
Yeah, I mean, we had an absolute blast. It was a great time. It's the movie itself. There was a lot of trepidation going into it for me because of the reviews it got at Cannes Film Festival and from what people who had screened the movie before had said about it. And I just did not go into the movie with a whole lot of confidence. But I came out of it having had just as much fun as when I watched the other Indiana Jones films. I thought that this one did a much better job at a lot of things than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did. And so when I walked out of that indie movie premiere, I was nothing but ecstatic that I had just gotten to see a brand new Indiana Jones film, something that I really didn't think was going to happen.
Yeah, no, who thought that in 2023 we'd be sitting here doing this stuff? I mean, Crystal Skull was what it was, right? And then when we met, first started hanging out, I think, one of the things we connected over was movies and talking about this and that. I mean, you being a lot younger than I am, thankfully I've seen a lot of these older movies, and so many young people haven't. But this was something that we connected on, how fun Last Crusade and Temple of Doom and Raiders is, and just the character and the whole thing. And, you said it was your birthday, and it's kind of a joke, but it's not at the same time. Your birthday was Indiana Jones themed, and this is your third birthday that has the same theme.
Yeah. 25 years, and I've had 3 Indiana Jones themed birthdays. Never had a Star Wars themed birthday, if that tells you anything about how much I love Indiana Jones.
Yeah. Well, I have had a Star Wars themed birthday in my 30s, late 30s. So it's still possible for you to have a Star Wars one.
Yeah. It is. It is still possible. It was a great experience getting to see that movie. But, Colin, I don't think that our rehash is going to do it near as much justice as we can in our rapid reaction recording. We hopped into the car and we recorded our rapid reactions, right as soon as we walked out of the movie theater. And so, guys, without further ado, I wanted to try and think of something else to say. But without further ado, here is our rapid reactions. Okay, Colin, that was our raw, unfiltered thoughts and reactions about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny as soon as we had seen the movie. But now, we've had nearly 7 days. So I think we've had 5 days to kind of ruminate on it. And so, Colin, what did you think about the whole thing, start to finish, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? What's your overarching feel about that movie?
So, personally, I'm still really up on it. I really liked all the themes and the adventure. And, killing Nazis is always a good thing. And I really like going underwater. All the little different aspects to me coalesce into something really fantastic. Now, I can't say I'm 100% though. This movie in without its hiccups and certainly without its detractors. And for this, it just boggled my mind, and I've delved really deep into what bothers people about this movie. And most of it is unfounded. It really is. And it mostly has to do with Harrison Ford being old. And so that just bothers me for some reason. And I'd love to talk more about that if you want to. But yeah, for the most part, like I'm in the 90% approval ratings for this movie. I think there's a couple little good points, but they're really nitpicks over some stuff that just really make this, for me, a tip-top film. And I'm glad to put on my shelf with the rest of the DVDs when I'm able to, just to pop in anytime and watch.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, so, coming out of that movie, I felt like I'd seen an Indiana Jones adventure. All the beats were there, the chase scenes, all the levity, all of the globe-trotting, all of the elements to really bake an Indiana Jones cake were there. And so there was no glaring, omission or anything like that would have made this movie a giant negative. And I've heard a bunch of people, especially before the movie released, and that's how you really know that a lot of these criticisms are not genuine, because you have YouTubers who are not at Cannes. You have YouTubers who did not go to the premiere, who have not seen the movie, who are making long declarative videos about this movie saying, well, here's where they messed up, here's where they did right, and, most of this movie was crap. And they're not being truthful because they haven't even seen the film. And we all know that, and it's verifiable, but that doesn't stop them from trying to get these rage clicks and these hate clicks that they want on their videos. It's just the way that YouTube drives their service. And so when you have these guys trying to review a movie before it comes out, they're really kneecapping how good it can do and how good it can perform. And so I came into Dial of Destiny really worried because of hearing all of these critics, and I exited the movie feeling super relieved because I was like, people are going to like this movie. This is an Indiana Jones movie. If you liked The Last Crusade, if you liked Temple of Doom, you are going to like this movie. There's no way that you're going to come out of this and say, well, that wasn't an Indiana Jones film, because it absolutely was. It hit all of the right notes and hit all of the right beats. That's not to say it's as good as Raiders or as good as Crusade, or even as good as Temple of Doom. It's not, but it's not, as bad as Crystal Skull. Like, Dial of Destiny can contend with the other three movies as a valid sequel to those movies. As a valid, this is its rightful successor. Not to say that I know that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has fans out there, and I know that it is absolutely canon, and it's part of the story. Dial of Destiny references many things from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but Dial of Destiny was this spiritual successor that I really thought the indie films needed. And basically, the Indiana Jones IP has now gotten the Pirates of the Caribbean treatment. Because, Colin, I don't know how familiar you are with Pirates of the Caribbean, but those three movies came out as a trilogy. They were all pretty good. Everyone really liked them. Then the fourth one came out, basically no original cast but Johnny Depp, and a really weird, disconnected story, and it did not perform well. And then they came back and made a fifth one. It also didn't perform critically well, but fans of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise loved the movie because it felt way more in line with the original three. It brought back many of those cast members, and I feel like that's kind of the same treatment that Indiana Jones has received. There's a little bit of a hiccup around 4, but other than that, it's a solid IP with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I'll agree with all that. And what I'll say about the YouTubers, it's exactly like you said. They didn't know what was going on. It was all going off of rumors and conjecture. And I've watched a lot of them, and they've drone on and on and on about Harrison Ford and how old he is, and really I think it comes down to criticism about his age, and not only about Harrison Ford, but really Indiana Jones is, what is an old man going to be capable of? And to me, it's just a shame that they're going to focus on stuff like that so heavily that I think it's warped their brain in a sense of not being able to enjoy the movie for what it is, and that's just crazy to me.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you, because there were a lot of criticisms surrounding Ford's age, and there were a lot of things being leveled about the deepfake, and we're going to talk about the deepfake, and that is maybe what I would say is the most negative part of the movie for me, is that opening sequence, which is interesting because I know a lot of people, a lot of plot fans, or a lot of people who may assert that they didn't like this movie for the same reasons they didn't like the Star Wars sequels, that Helena's character was, they didn't like the strong female lead character. Those same kinds of critics, the things that I'm hearing them say are they only liked the first sequence and the rest of the movie was crap. And they really basically only say that because, well, the only time Helena's character isn't even a member of the movie is during that first sequence. But if you're really trying to sit down and say, oh, is this a quality movie? Be honest with yourself and look at that first sequence and say, does this look like a movie, or does this look like a computer-generated image for 20 minutes? Because that's what it is. And I'm not saying that CGI makes it not a movie, but what I am saying is when you have a shot that had no real-world filming at all, no real-world location, and is all CGI, you might as well be watching a Pixar film. It's the same thing. And so this message surrounding, the first part's the best part, I don't really think people are being that genuine. And we're going to dive into the reasons why here in just a minute. The last thing I want to say before we get into our breakdown of the movie is I want to talk about box office real quick, because this film is going to definitely rank itself among the box office film, or among the blockbuster films this year that did not succeed at the box office and that essentially flopped. And I really, really liked this movie. The box office is not the end-all be-all to film. And, back in the day, people didn't talk about the box office. You went and watched the movie and you came back and you talked about if it was a good film or not. But, obviously, movies are commodities. Movies exist to make money. Studios make them to turn a profit. And so when you have massive films with massive budgets that don't turn profits, that is a concern for a studio, and it leads to films like this no longer being made. And so that's a worrying trend that we've seen in 23, where many blockbuster films have failed. Many blockbuster films have flopped. The Flash may be the biggest box office flop in history. They're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, so right now it's considered the opening weekend is $60 million, and that's for domestic. Worldwide, it's sitting at $130 million. And considering what the other stuff is out there that has come out this year, you're talking Super Mario Brothers. And that thing has just absolutely killed it. I mean,
it wasn't a flop at all. Super Mario Brothers' biggest movie of the year.
And so, what are your, and then you got Guardians and John Wick, but then you have Shazam. This thing, it just did, it didn't do well. And The Flash, it's crazy. I think there's movies that are objectively better than, like Mario Brothers. I went and saw that with my kids. It has a lot wider of an audience. My kids still went and saw Indiana Jones, but they were the only ones there, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
This movie leaves a lot of audience out. Whereas, I don't know about you, Carter. When I was a kid, so I'll tell you, I saw the previews for Last Crusade, and me and my friends, what were we? What was I? 6, 7, 8 years old?
1989.
Yeah.
So however you were old.
Yeah, I was born in 82. So 6 years old. Man, I was so pumped to go see Last Crusade. Just by seeing the commercials on the TV. So what has changed? I mean, this seems to me like, why was I so pumped at 6 years old to go see Indiana Jones? Because I'd been watching Temple of Doom, and I'd been watching Raiders on VHS tape. And now my kids, they've watched all those Indiana Jones, and it's not the same. And so there's some disconnect there that is leaving a portion of this audience out, if you ask me.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And, we cannot fault audiences alone and say, oh, this movie might not be what is the audience's taste. And that may be the case. But you also have to you put the blame where it goes, and that's at the feet of the studio. That's at the feet of Disney, and that's at the feet of Lucasfilm. And not that I don't love Disney Lucasfilm Productions. We have a Star Wars podcast. There's no way that I'm not a big fan of those productions. But you have to take a critical eye at these and say, Indiana Jones, a great franchise and one of my all-time favorite franchises, does not have the same brand recognition as Star Wars. And so when you think of how much money you're going to spend in proportion of an Indiana Jones movie versus a Star Wars movie, it's really, really important to take into account the budget that you're going to put into these films, because the Indiana Jones movie had a higher budget than all but 2 of the latest Disney Star Wars films. And so Indiana Jones not having as wide a recognized IP, not having as wide a number of fans, and you're spending the same amount of money on it, you're basically relying on some Top Gun Maverick level feat. You're basically laying it down on the table and saying Indiana Jones is going to have the same massive reception that Top Gun Maverick did, because if it doesn't, we're going to lose money. And that feels like that's what they did, but if that's what they did, that's the most irresponsible thing you could do in filmmaking. Like, why would that have been your direction to go? Top Gun Maverick was an amazing movie, and it was a phenomenon. People wanted to get back into the theaters, and it was this first giant grab onto and ride movie. And Indiana Jones is releasing among multiple giant summer blockbusters that a $300 million price tag is just a lot to ask. If you were to go back in time and tell Steven Spielberg and George Lucas when they're filming The Temple of Doom that they're going to have an Indiana Jones movie make $130 million on its opening week, they're going to kill you, because they're not going to believe you that a movie can make that much money. And now we're talking about how an Indiana Jones movie that made $130 million worldwide on its opening week is probably not going to get into the black. It's probably not going to be into the positives. It's probably still going to lose money. And that's just why we need to now sit down as a culture and take a look at these massive movie budgets and say, movie studio, maybe you don't need to spend this much. Maybe you can lower the number a little bit across the board so we can ensure that people are making money and we keep getting the kinds of movies we want. And so they quit blaming flops on things like technology or marketing or things like that, when really it flopped because you spent too much money to overcome.
Right. Yeah, I mean, all that sounds like on point to me. I think what the general thing is to make money, because $300 million is what the movie costs to make, and then they spend money on marketing. To get in the black on this stuff, they got to make triple what they cost to make. And so that's $900 million. And it's going to be a while before they don't, before they used to rely on DVD sales, and that's not a thing anymore. So this one's going to be a challenge to get up there. I'm encouraging all my friends to go see it, but
yeah, I agree with you. I want people to see it because I really, really do think that this was a great Jones movie.
Yeah,
but
there's a disconnect there that just
there is.
Yeah,
there is a big disconnect.
It didn't make the mark as far as audiences showing up, and for whatever reason that is, it's a conundrum.
Yes, it is one that I hope studios are able to solve. And a lot of people are saying it's just moviegoers' tastes have changed, that we're not going to have the popularity of Marvel movies and Star Wars movies and Indiana Jones movies that we would have 10 years ago. And I don't know if I'm ready to say that. I don't think that we have enough data to prove that. I mean, we just had Into the Spider-Verse have this massive, groundbreaking week and month. And so there's no reason for us to sit here and say audiences are tired of big IP movies, but the Spider-Verse movies take a really different direction on those films, and they get really creative with what they're doing. And so audiences may just be a little worn out of the rote storytelling, and these studios might just have to get to the drawing board and have to get a little more creative to get people in the seats in the theater.
Yeah, and so like it's really hard to predict because like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 did really well. I mean, like worldwide it's sitting at 837 million. But then you flip over to like Shazam and it's at 133. And The Flash so far is sitting at 246. And I understand Guardians has been out longer than those or whatever, but or Ant-Man is another one. It's half. It's half of what Guardians is doing. And so it's like those are two superhero film genre things, and one did really well and one didn't. So Where does this mesh? It's really hard to pinpoint, and all we can do is speculate, but it's going to be, you can't boil it down to one little bitty thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that's possible. I think that it's not a superhero movie thing per se, because the Ant-Man's an even better character study because it's also the third movie in a trilogy, just like Guardians. I mean, stacking those two movies up against each other couldn't be easier because they should be doing about the same, and one of them just isn't. And so we really have to sit down and evaluate, well, what's the reason that this movie succeeded, and what's the reason that this movie didn't?
You could go into a pretty deep analysis on like director, actors, budget, marketing, filmmaking, all these other things, and there's going to be somebody in a corner of each one of those things. Oh, it was this, it was that, it was this, and I think one common denominator you can say is Chris Pratt does really well. So
yeah,
because he did Mario Brothers also.
Yeah. Hire Chris Pratt if you want your movie to be successful. And that was a rumor floating around for a little while, was that Chris Pratt was going to assume the Indiana Jones mantle, and they were just going to recast kind of like James Bond.
And here's another thing I want to mention, just in case you're wanting to sit there and say, oh, well, these critics are having an effect on people going to the show. I'm sorry, Little Mermaid is sitting at 524 million worldwide, and the critics had an immense amount to say about that movie, not unlike some of the similar in the same vein criticisms that you had for Indiana Jones. And like, I don't even know what the opening was for Little Mermaid. Opening for Little Mermaid was 95 million. And so this is a movie that there's a lot of missteps with The Little Mermaid. And it doesn't have anything to do with the actress. It has to do with the construction of the movie. I want to make that clear. And that movie is on the opening outperformed. And like, we'd have to really graph this out to do some predictions on what do you think it is. But as it stands, here's two movies, critics were lambasting this thing, and totally unjustified if you ask me in a lot of respects. And Little Mermaid's doing better than Indiana Jones. So you can't, I'm just buttressing my point. You can't point at any one thing saying that this is why a movie did bad. Yeah.
No, I agree. There's so many factors. And there's so many people with agendas, right? I mean, the sound guy isn't going to say, well, your movie didn't do good because you didn't spend enough on the sound budget. Things like that. Like, everyone has an opinion on why this movie didn't do good. And it's very difficult to nail down one cause for why a movie didn't do good, because it's oftentimes multiple causes. You take the Solo case study, and it's like, came out 6 months after The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi was controversial. Also, they didn't market Solo very well. Also, it was a recast of a beloved character. Also this, also that. Like, there's many factors, and so everyone has their favorite, this is why Solo did bad, when in reality, it's all of those factors combined are why Solo didn't perform well.
Right.
And so you have to take all of those into consideration, and some have more weight than others. I mean, I'm going to sit here and say that there are reasons that Indiana Jones might not have performed as well outside of budget, but I still think budget's the number one reason, and it's going to be very difficult for someone to convince me otherwise, because $300 million is a lot of money to spend on an Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, and then one more thing I want to say about this is, this is also kind of like an unpredictable thing too, because I clicked on Fast X on this Box Office Mojo. It made $67 million in the opening weekend, but it's currently sitting at around $700 million worldwide. So these, we're only a few days into this, and it's not something that you could sit there and say, yes, that an less than stellar opening weekend predicts, if this is a bad movie or not. I think you have to take in a few months of this compared to other movies that are similar in vein to this stuff. I mean, because Fast X didn't have a bunch of kids turning out for that either, and Vin Diesel's getting to be a pretty old guy. So they've made 10 of those silly movies, and these predictors are just too wild.
I agree. We're definitely gonna have to reevaluate in a couple months to really see where Indiana Jones is going to be laying down. But Colin, we've spent enough time talking about the meta of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Let's get into the movie itself, because despite what critics have said, or despite box office performance, we loved the movie. You and I really, really enjoyed it. And so, as Star Wars fans, as Lucasfilm fans, it's important for us to sit here and talk about, what landed for this Indiana Jones movie for us. What do we want to see the successes of this Indiana Jones movie translated to Star Wars? How did Lucasfilm do with this movie that, they need to be doing this with Star Wars? And so, the very first part of the movie that opens up, we've already talked about it a lot, is we find Indy not back in time, literally. This is just set during, the main movie is set during 1969. This part of the movie is set towards the end of World War I. We don't have exactly if it was 1944 or 1945, but somewhere around late 44, early 45. And so, or no, I guess it would have been 44 regardless. So, right around the end of World War II in the European theater, we have Indiana Jones and a character who we had not been introduced to before, named Basil Shaw, who is an old, longtime friend of Indy's. They are rocketing down the railways in what we presume to be Germany, or at least definitely Central Europe, and they are fighting to find the Spear of Longinus and to find this opening MacGuffin that every Indiana Jones movie has. And the first thing that I notice out of this very opening is that they're using the classic title card from Raiders and Crusade and Crystal Skull. The only Indiana Jones movie that didn't copy this title card scheme was Temple of Doom. And so the very first thing I noticed about Dial is they're going back to the classic title card screen.
Yeah, that was cool. That hit me really good too. It was fun. But yeah,
it was a good time.
The very first scene is they punch you right in the face with the de-aging thing and let you know that this is because this is the fun of Indiana Jones stuff. Like, you had Last Crusade start when he was a kid, right? And then what is it? Temple of Doom started, and he's wearing a suit. And we didn't even know who Indiana Jones was when the first movie came out, Raiders. So it's always fun to see, you're jumping head first into an action bomb in a Indiana Jones movie. And I love seeing this. What was so special about getting this one started was the de-aging. It just, this is a new technology to us as we sit in, even in 2023, to see the quality of how they're going to do this stuff, right? This technology is in its infancy. And so I'm always super interested to see how this goes. But outside of that technical aspects is, like I said, where's Indiana Jones now? And so there's always, up until this movie, there's always been a mythos of what Indiana Jones did during World War II. And we get to find out. And he's still doing what Indiana Jones does, is seeking out those artifacts. And that Spear of Destiny, or whatever you want to call it, is a really fun MacGuffin. I thought of the Hellboy movie films, movies.
Movie films.
Yeah, I'm old. I'm from the past. But it's it even remarks that one of the Nazis says, to the victor go the spoils. And Indy's like, what do you mean? Berlin's bombed out and the Fuhrer's in hiding. And so they're thinking this spear is going to give them an edge in the war somehow. And so the mythos behind that spear is whoever controls this their army is invulnerable or something like that.
Well, and that's the Hellboy mythos, right? That's
right.
the,
Well,
that's the Hellboy mythos
I think
surrounding the spear.
You can extend that to this as well, but that's a leap you have to make yourself. They don't explain that here in this one. But my point
the only reason I'd say maybe you can't extend that is because that's what the Ark of the Covenant does. So they got to think of some other wacky thing for the spear to do.
They're leveling up. I don't know, and they don't have the Ark at this point, right? They're trying everything they can to figure it out.
So you've talked about it, the de-aged face. We open this up. It's not exactly on the train. I guess I skipped a little bit of a beat. They're in a home or in a building, basically looting it, finding the artifacts, getting ready to get it on the train to get out of there, and to kill Indy while his friend Basil hides in the woods. And this is where we first get to see de-aged Harrison Ford. And I'm not going to sit here and say the technology has not made leaps and bounds since Rogue One. I mean, this Indiana Jones deepfake, this Harrison Ford deepfake, looks much better than the one of Moff Tarkin, the one of Leia, even the ones of Luke Skywalker from The Mandalorian. But it's still not there. And I would say the amount of time we spend with this de-aged Indy, speaking to us and looking into the camera and moving his mouth and interacting with other real-world actors, you really do start to see the holes in the technology and start to realize that we are years away from this technology being something that I am comfortable being used on screen for that amount of time. I don't think the de-age worked for the amount of time they used it. I don't think that it's probably the most negative part of the movie for me is the de-aged Harrison, in that it never landed, because you see and hear, you see 30-year-old Harrison Ford, but you absolutely hear 80-year-old Harrison Ford. Yeah. I mean, it is an 80-year-old man's mouth coming out of a 30-year-old man's, an 80-year-old man's words coming out of a 30-year-old man's mouth.
Well, I think you mentioned there's a 80-year-old hand at one point on screen. It's like, man, this is... Yeah. You can't de-age just the face, you know? And
he reaches down on top of the train to pick Basil up, and the hand reaching down is so clearly the hand of an 80-year-old man. Like, it doesn't look anything like it's been de-aged. And that can be de-aged with makeup. Like, that's not even something they need to spend the money to go in and digitally recreate. The scene is of Harrison reaching down and giving his hand to somebody. It's cut off at the wrist. So all you got to do is slap a little makeup on his hand, save a couple $1,000s, and then there you go. That's how we start to trim this budget down to get us to where we need to start making money. Lucasfilm, hire me and I'll come audit your movies.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as my perspective on the de-aging, I heard somebody say like his face looked rubbery. You know, I'm inclined to agree to that, but I'm still glad we got to see 30-some odd, you know, and they even did the math. He should have been in like his 50s or something here. So some people even say they did a little bit too much de-aging on him.
Yeah, that's actually probably true, because let's see. Indy was born in 1899, and so if this was 1945, then he's supposed to be 46 years old.
Yeah. So I'm still super interested to see how that stuff plays out. And then, of course, the criticism is like, well, you know, like in Rogue One, we saw Princess Leia for just a few moments and Tarkin for just a few moments. And in this one, you know, they could tell they tried to save on the budget by putting it in the dark as much as they could. And it's, you know, I'm fine with the de-aging stuff. They just got to be, they got to execute it almost perfect. And it's hard to do. It really is.
Well,
expensive.
I'll say one more thing about the de-aging before we move on. The scene, Indy is riding a motorcycle up to that train before he has boarded the train, and it is a close-up face shot. And my two questions for James Mangold are, A, why would you do a close-up face shot of a deepfake? And B, why did your close-up face shot of a deepfake not have a neck and just look like it was a digital hand imposed over a still background that was filmed for 10 seconds? Like, I don't know. That was probably the worst scene in the whole movie to me, and the worst cinematography in the whole movie to me was this close-up headshot. Looks like he's on a Zoom call, 30-year-old Harrison Ford. It just did not work. And that was where I saw the most glaring hole. But I like the fact that all of this happened at the very beginning, and we're getting our biggest criticisms out of the way at the very beginning. Because really, like I said, this is probably my most severe criticism of this movie, is everything that happened in this beginning sequence. And so beyond that, it really starts to pick up and become a good Indiana Jones flick.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
From these opening few bits, the other scattered notes I have are, I'm really happy about the Spear of St. Longinus to begin with. One of my favorite saints. I think he's super cool, and also was I love, obviously, Raiders and Crusade are my two favorite Indiana Jones movies, and so I really like when they go after the Judeo-Christian myth stuff and go after these biblical artifacts, and so the Spear of Longinus being the opening MacGuffin was really, really cool for me, and I just thought everything surrounding that plot point was exciting.
Yeah, I like how that. It's so great. Well, I've already said my piece on it.
In the building at the very beginning, there's an explosion where Indy is able to get free from his German captors. This explosion looks like it totally would have cooked him. But if he can survive a nuke in a fridge, then I think he totally survived some random wimpy World War II bomb in Berlin.
Yeah, I heard some other folks saying this was unrealistic or something. And, I kind of don't think so. There's a lot of stories of unexploded ordnance. And I know this one exploded, but I'm talking about like on impact. Right, and then destroying buildings through kinetic energy itself, and then he was strung up on the end of a rope, and had just freed his hands, so he couldn't fall when the other Germans fell, or when the Germans fell, not other Germans. But the point of this is to establish for our the non-veteran indie goers is that this character he's a badass. He's got a lot of wit about him, just to have the foresight to undo the bindings, and then, just being able to survive the cataclysm of what this bomb being dropped was. But also my main point is that, this is the action to get you into the film, stuck into the film. It was a really cool scene. I enjoyed it a bunch. I really did. Because it was scary. I thought he was going to die. Well, obviously no, he's not. But how is he going to get out of this?
Right.
We want to see. Right?
Right. Well, and I'll say this. We went to the movie with a couple people who had never seen an Indiana Jones film before. And so these friends of ours who had never seen an indie film, this was their first one. A scene like that is important to inform them that Indy is always the luckiest guy in the room, right? It's obviously a movie, and it's a movie about adventure and action, and so you suspend your disbelief a little bit about things that are happening to them. I'm not talking about the supernatural aspects of Indiana Jones, but I'm talking about in the Temple of Doom, them jumping out of an airplane in the raft. You just suspend your belief a little bit because, it's going to work out for this guy. Oh, he's going to be able. Like an explosion and then him swinging by his neck at the beginning of this movie. That's an important scene to tell people, hey, just check your expectations a little bit at the door. Suspend some disbelief to say, something impossible's not happening, but something that could only happen to this guy is happening. Is an important way to sit down and watch all of the indie films. Because if you don't, you're going to have a bad time. If you don't suspend your belief, you're going to have a bad time. Colin, I think that's it for this first little bit of the train chase scene. The most important things that we all needed to get as an audience from this scene was that Voller, played by Mads Mikkelsen, A, is a terrifying villain, and B, that Indy and him had a little bit of history, and also that Indy had some history with Helena's father, because Helena is his goddaughter. And so that whole opening scene was just to give us the Dial of Destiny, Archimedes' Dial MacGuffin, the Antikythera, as they also call it. This one's got a lot of names. Antikythera, Archimedes' Dial, Dial of Destiny. That thing is in this opening scene, as well as establishing Mads' villain's character and establishing Indy's relationship with Basil. Yeah. And that's all the whole opening de-aged 1945 scene really gives us.
Well, the other thing, I'll mention one last thing, is... the villain, what's his name again?
Jürgen Voller.
Jürgen Voller. He takes that pole to the face, and you're like, well, not seeing him again. But we do.
Yeah.
And that's further. The anti-aircraft cannon takes a hit from a bomb and shoots a bunch of Nazis off the train. And so these guys, we watch it, they're getting blown to pieces on this thing. And it's kind of tame, you know, there's not a Rambo film where they're just blood and they're not being smeared. But, I mean, the next thing to it they are. And so we kind of don't know it at this point. And, of course, we don't care about them because they're Nazis, right? And, but, yeah, I want to elaborate on this. We're going to circle back to this because this is an establishment thing that is like brings up a bigger point throughout the film.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we open the rest of the film, you know, outside of this prologue where the film really begins. The scene was in the trailer, and it's, you know, Harrison Indy being jolted awake, and him just kind of twitching. Well, I really liked this scene as a really good beginning of the rest of the movie because it was funny. It had a little bit of levity that we needed. And it also was basically like Harrison Ford got to play Harrison Ford. Not that he got to play Indiana Jones because he's angry and he's being a grumpy old man and he's curmudgeon-y and he goes and threatens these 60s hippie kids with a baseball bat to turn off their music. It's just like perfect old man, you know, I'm, you know, grumpy and don't give two shits Harrison Ford that we all know and have gotten to know from interviews.
Right, yeah. And it's cool to see, like, I'm wondering why he's living in the city. And this is not the Indy we know and love, right? And I think some criticism from other people stem from this, but this establishes why is he the way, why are the way things are in this? And it further goes on from this, you know, he shambles through town. None of his students care about anything he has to say. And it's kind of a sad picture, but it's meant to be that way. And there's good reasons for it, which we'll get into.
Yeah, exactly. You're right, because I wanted to know why is Indy in New York City? You know, we open up with him teaching at this new college, and throughout the first 4 movies, Indy's a professor at Marshall College, which is this really, really thinly veiled Yale allegory. It's basically they just couldn't use the name Yale they couldn't use the name Yale in the movie, and so they're using Marshall College, but everything else it's Yale. And so it's like, why did he take this pristine position to go teach at Hunter's College in New York City? We don't know the allegory. Maybe it's just Columbia. But, you know, why would Indy move from this real nice Ivy League job into New York City to teach here? And so I had that question, and it's not answered in the movie. And you're absolutely right that where we find Indy at this time is we see Marion has presented him with divorce papers. We are yet to know the reason. And so we, as viewers, are like, why is Indy so down and out? Why is Indy finding himself in such a rough spot? And we talked about this in the rapid reactions. This is where many of the critics of this movie and critics of the Star Wars sequels will come in and say that Indiana Jones got Luke Skywalkered, as they would put it. And that, you know, he was a failure and, you know, all of his life's accomplishments basically amounted to nothing. And that he's left in just this sad, miserable, destitute old man state that many of these critics feel like Disney leaves our heroes in these states. And as people listening to this podcast know, I love all Star Wars, but The Last Jedi is probably my least favorite of the films, and I had some problems with Luke's characterization in that movie as well. I had less problems with Han's characterization in The Force Awakens, and I essentially have no problems with Indy's characterization during this movie for a couple reasons. One, Indy has this like moral background and fortitude just as our other heroes do, but he's really steeped in the real world as well. We've seen him be a womanizer. We've seen him deal with other things as a character and that deal with morality. And so seeing him in this negative state was a little more believable. But as the reason for this is explained through the movie, I think it is totally justifiable why we found Indy in the state that he's in.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, we should just spoil it, you know, because I think this is, of all the little critical tidbits I've watched, it's Disney Lucasfilm has taken a hero that they know and love and reduced him down to what we saw on the screen, like a potentially alcoholic, falling asleep in a recliner, curmudgeonly guy. And so there's a lot of consternation with that. And I would agree with those notions if it wasn't explained in this movie why he was the way he was. And, like comparing it to Star Wars, we didn't get that explanation for quite a long while. We had to speculate on a little bit of those aspects, right? And
right.
and there's a lot of discussion to be had, which we've had, about how that was handled. But it's exactly like you said, Carter, is we don't find out till later in the movie, and it's really well handled for Helena Shaw in this to give her some perspective. But we find out that Mutt has Mutt is I can't hear very well. I don't know which one it was, but he has died in the Vietnam War. And so, my parents, my dad didn't go to Vietnam. I think he was too young. He never got drafted. That was something that people your age, Carter, and my age haven't faced. Of course, I did go to Iraq and I did do stuff like that. But, it was even still comparing those two situations is vastly different. But losing a child in such a situation like that is the stress it puts on relationships. And remember, the Marion and Indiana Jones, they didn't have a typical relationship. Mutt was an adult when he came and found Dr. Jones, right? And there's something different about how that we can easily presume, based off of real life, that these relationships have different foundations. That Mutt was only a part of a very brief portion of Marion and Dr. Jones. Well, Marion more so, but Dr. Jones's life, right? And so to gain a son and lose him in that fast, I can't imagine the heartbreak. Unfathomable. And so everything about this, I think, justifies how Indy is portrayed in these scenes.
Well, and you're a parent, and so you would obviously be able to have, expound on what these feelings could even possibly be. But as you said, there's no way for you to know until it happens. There's no way for anybody to know until it happens. But that these people fall into inconsolable grief, and that's explained by Indy in the film, is that his mother couldn't handle it, and he was helpless to console her. He had no way to help her, and that just ultimately caused this divorce. And that Mutt not being in this movie was basically a foregone conclusion because of the reception of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because of things that have happened in Shia LaBeouf's career since then. It was very, very unlikely that we were going to have Mutt Williams in this film. And so I think that the explanation that he died in Vietnam was a very respectful way to handle that character, was a very respectful way to handle Indy and Marion's relationship, and was a way to respect Shia LaBeouf as an actor. I think that all of these factors and explaining that as the character's demise, and ultimately him still dying a hero, was a very important aspect of this movie that was addressed in a way that I didn't predict, and in a way that I'm extremely happy it was addressed. Despite how I feel about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I don't want them to just ignore the fact that Indy has a child. That's an important aspect and element of his character.
Right.
So, we continue to move through the movie, and we see at the beginning that the set piece for this movie is the moon landing. It's the Apollo mission to the moon, and that we have just landed on the moon. And so, we see Indy is, he doesn't know that it's a holiday on the opening of it. But the real important aspect of this is the symbolism surrounding the moon landing and the symbolism surrounding Apollo 11. And so our country, when we landed on the moon, obviously moved into this unpredictable accomplishment, right? Like, it is impossible to think that the moon landing was going to happen for most of human history. And then we just kind of happened on it very shortly after flight was developed. And so the symbolism of this set piece is important because of a piece of dialogue referenced halfway into the movie where the Teddy character asks Dr. Jones if he knew the Wright brothers, obviously the inventors of flight. And Indy's insulted by this. He's like, those guys were born during the Civil War. But the Wright brothers accomplished flight in 1903. And so that was 4 years after Indiana Jones was born. But the important thing to note about that piece of dialogue, the reason that Wright brothers joke was placed in the movie, and the reason the moon landing was placed in the movie, is because between the Wright brothers' initial flight and us landing on the moon, the time gap is only 66 years long. So from where human beings first took flight to landing on the moon is only 66 years. And so that's really amazing that technology is able to progress as quickly as it was throughout that portion of the 20th century. Well, what else progressed during that portion of the 20th century is Indiana Jones as a character. This is where all of his adventures take place, is basically, essentially, between when flight was invented and the moon landing. And so you have the moon landing marking this new dawn in world civilization, this new dawn in technology, and sunsetting many old ways of doing things as a sunset on many of the norms of the beginning 20th century, because the societal changes we saw in the 60s and all of these different aspects are all kind of tied up in the symbolism of the moon landing. And so also tied up in that symbolism is the sunset of Indy as a character, of him having to feel like the world has moved on without him, that the world has forgotten him, that all his accomplishments and all of his goals, despite those things, he's now still just a divorced professor with a dead kid, and that he feels to be in an awful place where the world has completely forgotten he and his contributions. And so the symbolism of the moon landing, where the world is on the top of a mountain, we just accomplished one of the greatest goals in human history, is juxtaposed with Indy fading without any kind of applause or without any kind of notoriety. And so him having to grapple with this throughout the movie is set up here at the very beginning.
Yeah, gosh, that's really deep. I don't have anything to add to that. I'd echo that sentiment exactly. That's so good.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. So after this, we see Indy meet his goddaughter, Helena. She expresses great interest in Archimedes' dial because she's an archaeology student, but Indy learns that this is all a ruse for her to be able to sell this artifact for some cash. And so we get a long chase scene through the middle of 1960s Manhattan, which was really, really cool to see represented on screen.
This chase scene was so fun. He got on the horse, had some funny quips the whole time. It was really good.
He's being chased on a motorcycle. We also learn in these scenes that Mads Mikkelsen's character, Jürgen Voller, was part of Operation Paperclip. He came over from Germany and helped the U.S. with the space race, and this is part of the U.S. using Nazi scientists. And this was a really interesting way and a cool way for them to bring Nazis back as the bad guys and also make sure Harrison Ford is not de-aged for the whole movie.
And you have to know that about Operation Paperclip. They didn't mention that in the movie. I was waiting to listen to it. And they didn't say that.
Yeah, no, you're right. They really gloss over it. I mean, they say, he helped with the space race, but they don't really go into much detail of. There's not a lot of detail around the bad guys, which is not. It's usually not the case in an Indiana Jones movie. I would say maybe we needed a little bit more, couple sentences worth.
How did he survive getting a pole in the face like he did? He didn't have a scar or nothing. He's just like gone 1 second, there the next.
Right. So we run through this chase scene like you mentioned. Indy rides a horse through the streets and down a subway and is being chased by a motorcycle, and it's a really exciting chase scene. I would say that this is also one of the first times where I noticed that Steven Spielberg is not directing this movie. This is the only Indiana Jones movie where Spielberg didn't direct. He and Lucas were executive producers for this film, but he didn't direct it, and you can tell on the chase scenes, I think specifically, Spielberg's got these wide-angle shots and is really able to communicate the distress through movement. And I think that Mangold is much more of a character director, and he's much more of a using the actors to demonstrate this distress. And so you see Mangold with a lot of close-up shots, and you see Mangold with a lot of face shots and a lot of looking over the shoulder, and he uses a lot of the character's point of view to give the audience the sense of danger, where Spielberg uses the whole scene and is capturing things in wide-angle cameras. I mean, famously for The Last Crusade, he built a miniature model of the entire, or for Raiders of the Lost Ark, of the entire like Nazi compound to design that truck and horse chase scene at the end in Egypt. And so Spielberg has this large, big picture view in mind of his chases. Mangold's chases feel more personal and a little smaller, and so I think that makes the chase itself feel a little smaller than Spielberg's chases. And so this is not even a criticism, but more just, if you really want to see and notice that this is not a Spielberg Indiana Jones movie, look to the chase scenes.
Yeah, and I want to say more about the chase scenes when we talk about the one in Tangier. So I got stuff to say about that, but I want them to all encapsulate. So
sure. So Sala is kind of Deus Ex Sala, as
John
you said
Rhys
in
Davies.
Rapid Reactions.
Man, I love John Rhys Davies. He's in 3 of the Indiana Jones movies. Of course, he's Gimli in Lord of the Rings.
Well, he's in 4 now.
He's in 4 now. Yeah, there we go. And then he played a character on a show called Sliders that I liked. And so he's in a lot of these fantasy science fiction things that are, in my opinion, what make characters he plays notable and something, right? Like adventure films, I had no idea he was going to be in this. When he came on screen, I was ecstatic. I was hooting and hollering. It was so good. It was fun.
I was happy to see him introduced. As you said in Rapid Reactions, he's kind of Deus Ex Sala. And as I thought more about that after you said that in Rapid Reactions, he really is. Because Sala pops up and saves Indy's skin in the middle of downtown Manhattan. And as an Indiana Jones fan, you're like, what the hell is going on? This guy lives in Egypt. And so then they explain, oh yeah, because of the war and the Suez Crisis, Indy helped Sala move to the United States, and now he's a U.S. citizen. And Sala's talking about how he wants his grandchildren to know about Egypt and America. And he's just, Sala's this real good representation of like all American, coming to the United States, the American dream kind of thing. His just little lines of dialogue show that. But I was super happy to have him involved because, like you said, he's been in 3, now 4 Indiana Jones movies. And so he's a pretty linchpin character. I mean, he's more important than Marcus Brody or maybe even Marion at this point.
Right. So, at this point, as far as the plot goes, what preceded the chase scene and Helena Shaw coming in possession of the dial, the henchman of the bad guy's character killed some people at the college, and those murders are blamed on Indiana Jones. And one thing I scratched in my head, I was like, this guy, it'd be like, Keanu Reeves being blamed for murder. I wouldn't believe that for a second. Right?
Right.
Exactly. And so, of course, he's going to go to his dearest friend who he helped immigrate to the United States for relief to help get out of the country on this.
And I'll say that some of the messier parts of the movie are maybe right here where we have Jürgen Voller's character. Obviously, he's got a government handler. And so Jürgen Voller is in New York at the behest of the U.S. government, but he's not really like working for them anymore because they got to the moon. And so he's supposed to be kind of under guard, kind of under escort. He's got a little bit of autonomy. But the important thing to note is that he's got Shawnette Renee Wilson's character watching over him as basically his government liaison. But he's also got these other guys with him who like answer to him and are Nazis. And it's never explained, at least to my knowledge, who the hell these guys are. Like, are they also U.S. agents that Voller is just convinced, hey, you should be a Nazi instead? Or, like, why is Shawnette Renee Wilson's character letting these guys stick around? Like, they never really address why these guys are allowed to hang out. And that's Boyd Holbrook's character, Kleber, is the main one I'm talking about. He's like the main henchman guy for this one. He's not the bad guy. He's not Jürgen Voller, but he's like head henchman.
Yeah, they're henchmen. That's all you can really say.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't get a whole lot of explanation of that, which is okay.
And they're
So-
brutal too. They kill the people in the college just for no reason.
Oh, they just
Crazy.
ice those guys. Just boom. Also, they kill Shawnette Renee Wilson's character. And I'm sorry that I have to keep saying Shawnette Renee Wilson's character. I never got her name in the movie. I don't even know if it was said in the movie.
Yeah, she was a CIA girl, right?
Right, exactly. She's clearly a CIA agent. But other than that, we don't really, she's in about the first half of the movie. And so they also ice her, and it's just like they killed so many people. This is one of what I remarked. I don't know if I even said this on the Rapid Reactions. I might have just said this when we walked out of the theater. But this is like the Indiana Jones movie where the most named characters get killed, and almost in the most nonchalant ways. These bad guys do not care at all about killing whoever they need to.
Yeah, no, they have no compunction at all. It's just a means to an end for sure.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So Helena Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, is able to acquire Archimedes' dial, and she's taken it to Morocco, to the Hotel La Antique, to sell in a underground stolen wares auction.
Yeah, illicit
is
auction
what Sala
something.
says.
And it's well established here at this point that she's only in it for the money. And like, she straight up pulled the wool over Indy's eyes. She got away in a real sly way, running, sneaking off. The CIA agent let her go for some reason. And then she's trying to auction this thing off and just tells Indy to his face, if you want this, you're going to have to buy it from me.
Right.
And this establishes that her character is unscrupulous at this point. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean,
yeah, she's in a bad spot. I mean, she's not a good person at all by this time.
And we should also mention that Helena Shaw is Indiana Jones's goddaughter, so he has a responsibility to her.
Right, exactly. So we get into Morocco. Indy and the Nazis pursue Helena Shaw's character here. Helena still has the dial, and then we go on a three-party chase through the Moroccan streets. And this is the chase that you said you wanted to talk about. The only thing I'll say about it before you go into what you want to talk about on it is that it was multi-party because you have the Nazis, you have Indy and Helena, and you have the owner of the hotel, who Helena apparently had been engaged to and then broke his heart, trying to kill Helena and take the dial to pay for the debt that she owes him. And so I thought the multi-party aspect of the chase was really fun because that's not common in Indiana Jones movies. It's, they're getting away from the bad guys and there's one group. Well, here at least there was two groups, and so it gave for an interesting chase dynamic.
Yeah, and so we also have to mention Teddy. This is where he's introduced, and this is they copy and pasted almost Short Round from Temple of Doom.
Yes. And I think they did a better job. I think Short Round is the best part of Temple of Doom, and I think Teddy is better. I really like Teddy.
This is going to be our first major disagreement. I think Short Round had infinitely more personality than Teddy did. And he was just Teddy is Helena Shaw's sidekick. Short Round is Indiana Jones's sidekick. And just the way he talked, the way Short Round talked, his mannerisms and all this other stuff was more endearing to me than Teddy. Teddy was just, a holdover for a plot device at the end of the movie.
I don't agree completely with that. Teddy had a lot to do with the plot, as him getting handcuffed and him getting stolen. And I think that the importance of having a child, and this is all the beginning of the second act, before they even discover the dial. And so you have Teddy being this obviously part of a plot device. You have the added suspense of having a child around, but you also have the same element of Short Round kind of being a street kid living on the streets. And then you have Teddy's little small plot line about discovering how to be a better person, because Helena has always been his role model, and she's not a good person. But now that he has Indy in the mix, and now that Helena is discovering herself and discovering that she does have a moral compass, and you're getting the same kind of directional pull for Teddy. That Short Round was more important to tug on the audience's heartstrings and to tug on Indy's heartstrings, but to not really have a character arc himself. Short Round had no character arc. Teddy has a character arc, and so I
Yeah.
think that's where you can fit Teddy in as the more interesting of the two.
Yeah, you're right about that character arc thing. And then another little note to mention is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carter, you might know better than me. Short Round met Indiana Jones after trying to pick his pocket, and then Indy took him under his wing. And
Right,
Teddy
yeah.
met Helena trying to steal from her, and then took her under his wing.
Yes.
So
yes.
Indiana Jones didn't have any mention that, oh, hey, I once had a sidekick that I found the exact same way. They couldn't have done that. Is that something they cut from this movie? Come on.
That was something that I was
tiniest of little nitpicks, but it's a nitpick nonetheless.
That was something that I was a little upset about too, is that he didn't, like you said, he didn't receive.
I mean, because there were a
he didn't
lot of
receive
callbacks.
any accolades or mention in the movie. And look, we know that Short Round, the actor who played Short Round, he acted in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And then he basically gave up acting after that. I mean, he was in The Goonies after that, and then that was it until he revived his acting career in 2022 and won an Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah. And so, Ke Huy Quan led this super quiet life, no acting since he was a child actor in Temple of Doom, and then boom, the year before Dial of Destiny comes out, he's on stage and wins an Oscar. And so I was honestly, if I had bet on this, I would have lost money, but I was kind of betting we were going to get a Short Round cameo in this movie.
One sentence call out is all, or a cameo. Well, from some level, a cameo would have been the best, right? But
see, I thought the cameo was going to happen. Yeah. Basically, Sala's level of involvement in this movie, I was like, well, given real-world circumstances of the actor's career just exploding in the last 6 months, then, I think they might try to work in a one-scene cameo for Short Round. Right. I mean, honestly, it's like the diver could have been the dive instructor. I can't remember the actor or the character's name, but it's like his old friend could have just been Short Round. He relocated to that part of the world.
Yeah, but the drivers all died. That would have been bad. Anyway, so
Antonio Banderas.
Yeah,
I can't believe I forgot it. It was Antonio Banderas is who played him.
So about that chase scene, we're kind of all over the place here, but that's good. We're talking about the characters, and that's a good thing. This chase scene was overall, in a totality, was a really good chase scene because of what we've already established. It was a three-way. They're trying to recover the dial from Jurgen Voller. They're trying to escape Helena Shaw's jilted fiance, and they're doing it in these little tuk-tuk trucks or whatever you call them. I don't remember exactly. Around Tangier, and lots of fun little scenes. But in totality, this being the third chase scene, if we count on the train, as they're being chased across the train, and then you're chased through a city, and then here's another chase scene. It's too many chase scenes, and so on the whole, I think it's a nitpick, but it's just a tad too much that is going to wear some people out.
See, I know you had said that, and you had said that to me after the movie had come out. I was trying to picture how many chase scenes are in each Indiana Jones movie, and if this was like above the average, below the average, because I rewatched all of them pretty recently, but I'm just trying to remember that I felt like The Last Crusade had multiple chase scenes in it, and that this one might be on par with the number of chase scenes from The Last Crusade. But it certainly eclipses your favorite, The Temple of Doom, and chase scenes. And I think it eclipses Raiders. And if I'm also remembering correctly, I think Crystal Skull might have the highest number of chase scenes.
Right.
Because the Crystal Skull is like chase scene to chase scene to chase scene. And obviously, everything about Indiana Jones is you don't get a breath. That's why The Rise of Skywalker is compared to Indiana Jones so much, in that the pacing makes it feel so breakneck. Well, an Indiana Jones movie, that's the point, is that it is breakneck. It's chase scene to fight scene to rolling into chase scene to brief giant nerd history moment to chase scene to fight scene to, just continually rolling on.
And of course, compare and contrast this to Last Crusade. You said that the tank chase scene was 18 minutes. And I don't know. There's something about the quality of that chase scene that just is over the top, if you ask me. Because it was multifaceted as well. You had Dr. Jones Jr. on one end fighting it out, and then Dr. Jones Sr. and Marcus fighting it out on the other side. And then you had all kinds of stuff going on. There's something that made that a really fun chase scene versus this one just not live up to that. I don't think that's a fair comparison per se, but but on the base level of this is a chase scene and that's a chase scene, this one left me wanting compared to the other one. That's a tiny nitpick. I wouldn't even consider that. Probably not legitimate.
And, if I'm remembering correctly, the point of the chase scene is obviously to get the dial from Voller, but he ends up with the dial at the end of that anyway. It's like that chase scene is effectively useless, other than some exposition dialogue that we could have gotten in another way. Because one of the things this is a mild criticism of the movie, is you can tell this is a 2.5-hour movie. None of the Indiana Jones movies are more than 2 hours. They're right at the 2-hour mark, all of them. And so when you have a 2-hour movie versus a 2.5-hour movie, doesn't sound like that's that big of a change. But in a movie like Indiana Jones, where it's designed to be breakneck and it's designed to be, just increasingly paced movie, more and more details, more and more information, a more complicated story, the farther and faster it goes. A 2.5-hour movie, it's clear to see that that's the case. Yeah, your storytelling is of that type.
You get some fatigue by the end of that too, with stuff like this going on for sure.
Yes, I agree. So we get through the Tangier scene, we get all the way through this, to have Voller and them have one half of the dial. There's still another half of the dial out there that exists, and the map to the other side of the dial is at the bottom of the Aegean Sea. And so Indy has a friend that he needs to go to that's an expert diver that's going to help them find the Graphicos, which is the map to the second half of the dial, which is supposed to be the map to Archimedes' tomb. And so this is where, at the end of the Moroccan chase scene, leading into the boat scene, is where we get Helena kind of at her worst. Not that she's acting the worst, but this is where we get all of the details about her life, in that she's got gambling debts and she's, whatever the female version of a womanizer is. She's been through a lot of men, and she's out here just living her life as a scoundrel, basically, and that she is trying to sell these artifacts to pay off these debts, and she's just not the kind of moral person that we would expect out of someone in Indiana Jones's, friends and acquaintance gallery. And really where you arrive with Helena's character is, I think she is Lando Calrissian in the Indiana Jones universe. Almost exactly. I mean, even the way Phoebe Waller-Bridge is delivering lines and the things they have written for Helena's character, the way she interacts with the guy that she burned, with her fiancé that she burned, these are all things that just sound like something Lando would say or do, or the way she acts feels like Lando. All of it. I really think they just wrote Lando into this movie.
Yeah. Her character grows on me, and I think that's intentional. She starts out as a scumbag, and this boat scene is a really large pivotal moment. I mean, because the Nazis show up and kill everybody on the boat. One guy drowns at the bottom, and they kill Antonio Banderas' character as a threat to get Helena or Indy to translate the tablet, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, again, more brutality, but it also shows some silliness on the Nazis' part in, like, why would you trust anybody who you're threatening to translate something correctly?
Right. Well, and so what the whole part you're talking about here is that Indy and his diver friend Antonio Banderas and Helena and everybody go out to fish for the Graphicos, and they're successful. They find it in a Roman shipwreck, and then they're brought back to the surface, and as you said, all the Nazis have killed everybody. And like you said, that this is where Helena's character begins to become endeared to the audience, because this is where we learn she is not morally corrupt. But they explain this after she does what appears to all of us to be the most morally corrupt thing possible, in that I'll tell you the exact location of this dial for $100,000. She goes through the whole thing, like you said, telling them verbatim where it is, only for us to learn later that she lied to them and she detonated some dynamite there to stop them from being able to pursue them. And this is where finally we see Helena as this extremely capable adventurer, but now she has the important element to Indiana Jones of the intellectual. She's able to talk about these things. She's able to suss out what the Graphicos means over all of the other characters, save Indy. And we are endeared to her because now we're like, oh, all of the elements of Indiana Jones's character are also represented in Helena now. Like, she hits all the same notes that Harrison hit in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
And she made this pivot because it was, I think, and this is kind of a stretch here. These are original thoughts. She saw, like, the Nazis are evil overtly, and they will go to no end to reach their goals. And if I had to guess, I'd say she's kind of looking at a reflection of herself in that, and maybe seeing if she kept making these poor choices, she'd go down the same path. I mean, because like the start of this conversation, like you said, she's willing to sell everything for $100,000, but then they kill the guy and she realizes that this isn't a winning strategy, literally, but also morally, because if you, I mean, this is what, like an old adage, you ride with them, you die with them. So if you align yourself with Nazis, guess what you are, I mean,
right,
and there's no two ways about that. And so I kind of think, if given the choice, this character given the choice, she chose the light side and not the dark side.
Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. And it's important for us to see her character do that, especially in 1969. I mean, with the horrors of fascism being less than 20 years away, it would be really, really troubling for some character to make these decisions, and then for us to still need to say, oh, they're a hero, or we need to be endeared to them. And so that, yeah, it's very good that this is the turning point in the movie. So we learn through the Graphicos, through Helena, that there's some weight to it. There must be something else. Indy is able to burn off the wax from the Graphicos and find the real key that shows that Archimedes' body is buried in Syracuse, not Alexandria. So they turn around, they sail west to the island of Sicily, and they go on the spelunking part of the Indiana Jones missions. They're crawling through the caves and the caverns. I'll say the travel graphic to get here, small criticism, doesn't look near as good as the old ones. I don't know why they changed it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just use the same old one.
Sure.
They updated it with some colors on the map and stuff, and it doesn't look as good as the old one. It's like you had. I might not remember correctly, but I'm pretty sure in all the 4 first movies, it's all the same exact graphic. So it's weird that they would decide to change it. So that might not be the case. Maybe each movie does have a slightly different graphic, but I wasn't a fan of this one. But they get to Syracuse, and they begin exploring through the Ear of Dionysus, which is this, cave system in Italy that's for tourists. But it is also the site of Archimedes' tomb. So they go through all the, tricks of finding the echo and where it sits. And I'll also say that through sound editing, the echo is inconsistent. There's one point in the cavern where Indy delivers a line and there is no echo whatsoever. So I will say that was a little weird.
These scenes where they're doing all this problem solving, going on the hunt, if you will, for this artifact, these are the best scenes in all of Indiana Jones. Not this one. I'm talking about across all the movies. In The Last Crusade, it's the very end where he's going through all the booby traps to get to, what is that? The Holy Grail. And then, when they're doing when they're figuring out the head of the staff and everything that's involved with the head of the staff and figuring out where the lost city is and all that stuff, and going down there in there to find the Ark. Such cool scenes that make this. This is why we watch Indiana Jones, if you ask me, and what makes it so cool is this artifact discovery and figuring out these things that nobody else can figure out, And then the bad guys just latch onto it and are able take advantage. But like literally, nobody but Indiana Jones can find this stuff. It's so cool.
Right. You're absolutely right. He finds the moon that is shining in to allow them. He finds the water displacement in Archimedes' tomb. Like, he's just able to arrive at these answers. And that's another reason Indy's hero is so good. He's not just some hero and he can punch Nazis and he can, climb walls. Like, he is also just this intellectual guy. He's able to solve puzzles. And it's a really awesome aspect that this character is a necessity to this character. Also in these cavern scenes is the standard, creepy crawly scene that you got to have in Indiana Jones. You got the ants in Crystal Skull and the snakes in Raiders, and you got the rats in Crusade.
The Temple of Doom. That scene scared me. I was pantsless when I was a kid, and there was the same thing in this one. They had the centipedes in that. Oh my god!
Yeah, what is the critter in Temple of Doom?
They just walk through. It's the exact same thing. They walk through a tunnel. A secret passage tunnel that leads to a room that's going to press down and kill them.
Right. But in Skull, it's ants. In the Crusade, it's rats.
It's bugs. It's centipedes and millipedes and insects and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think that this centipede one and this one was really skin crawling. I'm like, snakes don't bother me very much. Spiders don't ever bother me. What bothers me is mass amounts of, actually non-harmful insects. I would rather walk through 100 rattlesnakes than have to walk through 100 cockroaches that aren't even going to kill me because it grosses me out way more to be around these nasty bugs. And so that scene hit me the hardest. That one was definitely the worst one for me.
No, that's rough.
But I was happy to see that there wasn't an omission on the skin-crawling creatures. This movie, man, I want to say, just while we're kind of dancing around everything that happens in the cavern, when the Nazis get to the cavern and Teddy escapes, he drowns. The biggest actor I've ever seen. This guy's huge.
Yeah.
This man is a mountain of a person. I don't know. I don't remember the actor's name. I need to figure it out. But whoever they cast for this role, they definitely said, how about we just find the biggest person we possibly can? And so...
Yeah, the way he dies is brutal. And so, this is as good a time to talk about it as any. This is the Indiana Jones film. And people have died brutally in every Indiana Jones film. We ended the first one with people's faces being melted off. And I don't know if we've ever seen anything like that up to that point, right? In Temple of Doom, one guy has his heart pulled out of his chest. And that's, that scared me to bits when I was when I saw that when I was a little kid. In Last Crusade, there's a point where like 8 Nazis are on top of a tank, and then he shoots them all with one bullet. They all fall off. Like people being crushed, people falling to the bottom of a cliff and being blown up by the tank. And who can forget the end of that? He chose poorly. And I play that for my kids, right? Just so they can see. I'm like, if you make a bad choice, this is what's going to happen to you. And they're like, ah. And, it's all a joke. But, I mean, that scene right at the end of Last Crusade, that you remember that. And so, like, I'm going to remember a giant being handcuffed to a grate. I'm going to remember an anti-aircraft cannon just blowing Nazis to pieces. I want to remember the brutality of these henchmen just shooting what I thought was going to be a main character or a B-plot character, a main B-plot character, and she's gone. That's it. And so contrasting, brutality isn't really the right issue here. It's the quantity of the brutality of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Crystal Skull. That guy was eaten by ants in a really brutal way, right? And then they killed the Soviets there, killed all the villagers. That was awful. And so, it's really hard to quantify exactly how this film was more brutal than the others, but it was. I mean, people just died wantonly, and it's kind of over the top to me.
Well, okay, so I'll disagree with the over the top thing. I think it's fine. I do think it's the most brutal, right beside Temple of Doom. Raiders and Crusade don't hold a candle on the brutality part. I'll say that some of your examples of brutality from the other films, I would explain away with, you're right, they actually are probably more brutal the Grail scene, the face melting in Raiders of the Lost Ark. But the important element of those is that, and in Temple of Doom, the heart and the chest, all of those are supernatural brutality. In this movie, this is all real stuff that can happen to a person. Run over by a car, shot through the chest with a ballista, handcuffed to a grate and drowned at the bottom of a river. Like, these are all things that A, another human being caused to happen to you, and B, another human being could cause. Any of this stuff could happen to you or I in real life right now. And that was an element of brutality added to Dial of Destiny that I just wasn't prepared for, because always the most gruesome stuff in Indiana Jones happens, and it's supernatural. But the most gruesome stuff in this one was all just right out there. This is other people happening to other people.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
So we're really nearing the end of this movie. Jones and Shaw discover Archimedes' tomb. They discover the second half of the dial, but Voller is able to come, find them, grab the dial, kidnap Indy, leave Teddy and Helena. And so, Colin, this is actually really interesting, and I hope you remember. I didn't get to do two viewings of this movie like I usually prefer to, but why do they take Indy with them back in time? Why did they bring Dr. Jones? Why didn't they just kill him? They had to have a reason, obviously, but I don't remember what it was. Do you?
Yeah, I just think he was there with him at the time. I mean, there was no overt reason that I can recall at all.
I know there was, only by simple fact of there has to be. Like, because they put him in the plane with them. It's like, why would you not just shoot the guy in the head if you don't need him? And so they have Jones for some reason. Apologies to our listeners that I can't remember the reason. But they are taking Jones back in time. We learn that the Dial of Destiny is a mathematical device that calculates these fissures in time. At least that's what Voller's character believes. And so these fissures are up in the air. They're like the eye of a terrible storm. And so
Voller's
Nazis...
Yeah, his whole plan is to go back, kill Hitler, and take over and win World War II.
I know. And I have that in all caps in my notes, because up until this point, we don't actually know the guy's plan. We know the dial has something to do with time travel. We know he's a Nazi, so we know it's not good. But we don't really know what his thing is. And so when I learned in my notes, in all caps, I put, "We're gonna kill Hitler," because that was just the out of left field, goofiest thing I ever thought was going to be the plot line of this movie. And when I thought that was going to be the plot line of this movie, I kind of got upset, because I was like, are we for real doing, well, what if you went back in time and killed baby Hitler as a movie? Like, are we actually going to sit here and watch this? So
one thing to note is they're going back to, or they intend to go back to 1939. And this movie takes place, go ahead.
The time they're going back into 1939 is extremely important. It is 2 weeks before the invasion of Poland in 1939.
Right. But, and they presume where the intent is, right? So this is, in 1939, what was that? The Nazi regime was at full height of power, but nothing had been executed yet. And so this guy wants to take over. But this is going to be a small, time travel is... it's a very fun science fiction plot device that is, Back to the Future is one of my favorite set of films, and so many other things. It permeates Star Trek, and it is in Star Wars. We have the world between worlds, right? I don't know if that's time travel per se, but we can talk about that, and we're going to get to talk about it hopefully in August a bunch, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, hopefully.
You get to hear plenty about the world between worlds. So in quote-unquote real life, it's still not real life. This place, it starts in 1969, right after these moon landings took place. And so these are significant events in histories. 30 years prior was, like I said, height of the Nazi power just before the invasion of Germany. And so Poland. Just before Germany invades Poland. Exactly right. So, and what I want to draw attention to is that these are significant points in history. So there's other fictionalized stuff, and people argue with me like they're conspiracy theories. But I think I saw on Netflix just the other day. It's one of the things with the mythos about it is the Philadelphia Experiment, and another one is like the Montauk Project. It's a silly book when I read it when I was a kid, and it talks about time travel and quote unquote how it works. And so one of the premises of these silly books is that significant events in history are a draw for these, what you could argue in as perceived in this Indiana Jones universe, is these fissures in time. And so it's think of any significant thing in history, like so you could go back to the dinosaurs when an asteroid hit, or when nuclear weapons were first developed, or something like that, and go travel between these points in times and just be an observer or do whatever you want to do. But like, it's a science fiction thing that I really like. And of course, again, this is my premise. This isn't something that was explained in the movie, but it's a fun thing to think about time travel and how this works and all these different aspects of what it means for these characters in these films. And I just love the discussion behind all this stuff. And so I hope, dear listeners, you'll come talk to Time Travel about us on the Discord or wherever else you want to engage with us, and give your speculations on what the meanings of this Dial of Destiny and how it works and what impact it had on the film. Because I still think there's questions left unanswered about it, which we'll get into. So
I'll say I disagree on pretty much on many of the points that you said about it. And that I think the Dial of Destiny is explained, and that it is basically not a time travel device, is what it is explained. It is explained as is that it can only time travel to that one specific moment.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think it can be. I guess you could create one that could time travel to a different moment, but that specific dial, that specific Antikythera, can only travel to 273 BC.
Yeah. But and that's what the characters thought, was they could just do as they pleased and time travel as they wanted. So,
right. Well, and that's where we really get into the part where I was super worried about time travel ending when this whole movie, when the name came out and everyone was like, "Oh, it's about time travel." I was really worried because, we've gotten so many time travel movies over the last 20 years. Many times they break the universe or they don't do well. I mean, time travel was a big sticking point for Harry Potter. It was a big sticking point for the Avengers. Like, it's been a big sticking point that just usually when you add time travel to a universe, it becomes convoluted and it doesn't always work out. And so when they were going into the fissure and Indy starts to talk shit to Jurgen Voller, which is super funny because that's exactly what he's doing, is talking shit to him. And that, "Oh, you didn't calculate this right. You didn't think about continental drift. We're not going to 1939. Where are we going?" And then Voller's like, "I got to think." And his henchmen are talking to him and he's freaking out. And he's like, "Turn around," but it's too late. And then they get spit back into ancient history. And it was super cool. It was really good because this obviously was mentioned at the beginning of the movie. Indy was teaching about this battle. And we got the explanation that, this dial only works to this time period. Archimedes built and designed it to do just this. This was always going to happen. This always did happen. This is part of time. Like, it's just, this is a linear part of time. And so that was super important to me because it really essentially said this isn't time travel. While it is time travel and they went back in time, it's not wanton time travel, which I was very, very happy about.
Right, and they explained it overtly. Like, this was a draw. The Dial of Destiny was a lure to get somebody to come back and help Archimedes defeat the Romans.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we see that by the fact that in Archimedes' tomb, he's wearing a wristwatch. And that already spins your head. Because I wrote down in my notes in the movie, all right, they've got to fly a plane into this fissure to get to where they're going. How did Archimedes fly? That was like in my notes. I was like, how did Archimedes use the dial in the first place? And so that was a really good explanation that I obviously scratched out of my notes because they explained it. And so the third act gets weird in a good way. A lot of people were complaining about the third act. And look, if you didn't like the third act and you genuinely didn't like it, that is your prerogative. It's okay. But you just don't really like Indiana Jones movies. Like, if your problem is, well, Indy met Archimedes, that's so silly. He met an 800-year-old guy in the 1989 movie. He saw the Ark of the Covenant, a 2,000-year-old device, melt people's faces off. Like, what do you mean, oh, this is too silly? It's not really that silly, man. You just probably don't like the movies. And that's okay to not like movies. But you just got to say, oh, I don't like Indiana Jones. It's too supernatural for me. Because this is just the same level of supernaturality, supernaturalism, whatever that word is.
Yeah, over the top is what they'd say. But yeah, I mean, Indiana Jones is watch a dude crumble to dust after drinking the wrong cup of water.
Yeah,
he's watched a dude's heart be pulled out of his chest. It's not something, and then the aliens, interdimensional beings, go off and do what they do. So
yep.
I mean,
so it wraps up pretty seamlessly. The plane crashes. Nazis are dead. There's another plane because Teddy pursued them into the eye of the storm. They're going to be able to turn around. Indy doesn't want to go back. This is the main sticking point in that he doesn't have anything for him back in the real world. He did all of his service to his country. Now, for him, an archaeologist, the greatest thing that could possibly happen is for him to be allowed to live here in history and to just fade into existence. And that's what Indy wants. But Helena knows, there are people who love you. There are people who need you. Like, the world is not done with Indiana Jones. And so she knocks him out to bring him back, it was funny. It was totally fitting. And so then Indy wakes up back in 1969 New York. But he's got the Antikythera right beside him. And so he knows that it wasn't a dream, that he really did meet Archimedes and that he really did go back in time. It was a good wrap up right there to make all of that make sense, I thought.
And he reconciles with Marion at that point too. She says, "I heard you were back," and then they embrace, and that's it.
What really her line, "I heard you were back," was super important, because what we really are getting out of this is not, oh, I heard that you came back from out of time. She obviously means the old Indy is back. And Indy says that, the reason she left is because he couldn't handle her grief. He couldn't console her enough. And no doubt that's true. But what else is probably true, and what else I think we're supposed to glean from this line, is that Mutt's death had such an impact on Indy that it put him in such a depression, him in such a funk, that Marion felt like he was a different person, that Indiana Jones was gone. That now this is Henry Walton Jones Jr. This isn't Indiana Jones. Right. And so he's been on this adventure that's brought back his virility, that's brought back his willingness for adventure. And so now the true Indiana Jones really is back for Marion at this point.
Yep. Yep. And it's such a great thing to see, we're worried about like curmudgeonly Indiana Jones, and we find out that's not the case, and that he's got his life back. And that's can end better way, if you ask me.
Yep, I absolutely agree. They end the film with a recreation of the kiss scene, but this time Indy kissing Marion and asking where it hurts. And that added, while that scene was already really cool, it had a sexy vibe to it. It was really it was just a good scene, right? This added a whole, and maybe it was Mutt's conception, we don't actually know, but this added a whole new element and a whole new depth to that scene and to the meaning behind the kissing where it hurts thing for these characters that I thought was awesome.
Yeah,
again,
you can tell it became a part of their, like an inside thing for their relationship that defined who they are. It's a small little thing to anybody, but it's a really big thing to them. I mean, me and my wife have that same thing. I'm sure your wife do too. And it's something you find out is something that is really special, especially after it's gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that kissing scene also kind of summarized for me why this movie was so much better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Is upon rewatching Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I found that a lot of the callbacks felt heavy-handed to me. That a lot of the callbacks were kind of like, remember Indiana Jones? Like it was just an exact rehash of something from the first three. And this one just was a lot more like an homage. It was a lot more subtle, paying its respects to the first three. Like this kissing scene, giving some depth to old scenes, but not having to give some real direct reference. At the end, Sala walks off singing Soaring Tar again, which is something that he sang at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it's just like little callbacks like that felt a lot more natural and organic than some of the things that they did in Crystal Skull that felt a little too overt.
Yeah. I mean, overall, fantastic film. I think there's some nitpicks, but that's all they rise to. And I hope more people go and see this movie and have fun with it. And it's a really good capstone to all of these movies.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you.
And I think it's going to elevate Crystal Skull just a little bit too.
It does. It absolutely does, because it has to. Some of the things from Crystal Skull, they cannot be ignored, and this movie does elevate it quite a bit. I think knowing Mutt's fate helps out Kingdom of the Crystal Skull too.
Right.
I'd ask you, Colin, now that it's all said and done, and you've seen all 5 Indiana Jones movies, what's the ranking? Where do you place all 5 Indiana Jones movies?
So, tie between first place, give me a little bit more to think about it, between first place on Raiders and Last Crusade, because, and I would have to give, if you're going to make me make a choice, it's going to be Last Crusade, just from a nostalgia factor, right?
That's interesting. I thought Temple of Doom was your favorite.
It probably is. I'm trying to be a little bit more objective, right? Because I just watched, in preparation for this movie to coming out, so I could really enjoy everything that had to do with this movie. I wanted to share that with my family. I wanted to make sure my wife had seen all of them. I don't know if she'd seen Crystal Skull. I want to make sure my kids had seen all these movies. And so I watched them in order, Raiders, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, and then Crystal Skull. And I don't know, man. It's something about that Last Crusade that really does it for me, especially those insanes. He chose poorly. He chose wisely. Stuff like that just really does it for me. And
so what is it? Okay, so what's the 5?
So we'll do Last Crusade, Raiders, Temple of Doom, Dial of Destiny, Crystal Skull.
Okay. So my ranking's the exact same. Mine is, so that's my exact same argument for, as I say, I think The Empire Strikes Back is probably a better movie than Return of the Jedi, but the nostalgia factor of Return of the Jedi for me, and a little bit of the levity, is what makes it my favorite Star Wars. And so The Last Crusade's the same way. I think Raiders is actually a near-perfect film. I know it's taught in film classes. I know that it has been lauded as just this herald of new technology for the movie industry. And so Raiders is probably the best film, but I'll say the best one for me is Last Crusade, followed just by a hair length, Raiders of the Last Ark. Then a little bit of a gap, not a massive gap, but a gap in quality for me to then say, at least for now, Temple of Doom and Dial of Destiny, it could be an any given day for me on a tie right there. I mean, it just depends on what kind of mood I'm in, which one I'll say is better. Now, I've seen Temple of Doom maybe 100 times. I've seen Dial of Destiny a total of 1.
Yeah,
so we'll see if that's going to stack up on rewatchability. And then I'll say a big gap, and obviously the Crystal Skull. But Dial of Destiny, it's swinging back and forth between Temple of Doom for me, between if it's going to pass it or not. I'm going to have to see Dial a couple more times to make the final decision.
Yeah, and I'll say it's going to be Temple of Doom for me, just for nostalgia and Short Round and those silly things that happen in that movie, where they're eating dinner and they're having their brains and soup and the eyeball soup and all that stuff. It's so crazy.
It is. It absolutely is. Awesome, Colin. Well, that wraps up our Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny review. It was a really good movie. If you're listening to this and you haven't seen it, I don't know why you listened to the whole thing before seeing it. You should have seen it first because we spoiled it, but go see it anyway because it really, really is a quality movie. It is a respectful entry into the Indiana Jones franchise.
Right, yeah,
Colin,
so good.
It is. It was awesome. Now, we're going to roll right into our patron-powered segment, and this patron-powered segment is the segment where we talk about how the Force works. We field questions from our patrons at the Jedi Knight tier or above, and we answer them right here on the show. You can ask us anything you want. Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Lucasfilm, any question you can think of. Today's question is one that I'm super excited about, so we are going to hop right into how the Force works.
That's not how the Force works.
So, Colin, today our question is from our dear Patreon subscriber, Loaf. And Loaf wants to ask us, could Star Wars have an anti-hero show? perhaps one where it explores the Sith. Colin, why don't you take it away?
I have some incredible news for Mr. Loaf. Incredible news. He needs to watch The Acolyte. It's about to come out, I think, early next year. And I think that's exactly what this is. I pulled up the tagline for this in anticipation of this question. It's a mystery thriller that will take viewers into the galaxy of shadowy secrets and emerging dark side powers in the final days of the High Republic era. A former Padawan reunites with her Jedi Master to investigate a series of crimes, but the forces they confront are more sinister than they ever anticipated. And so, I guess that's kind of in contrast, though. Sith necessarily aren't anti-heroes. They're just, in some cases, straight up evil.
They're just villains.
But, from a certain perspective, they could be hero. Like Count Dooku was a hero to somebody, right? I mean, from our perspective, he's an overt villain, right? And did evil things. And you could probably say, the same thing for General Grievous. That dude was a coward in the end. He ran away and tried to escape and lived to fight another day. But to somebody, he was doing the right thing. And he did. I think could be a matter of perspective, but we can hash that out all day, right? An anti-hero show. I guess you want like a Punisher in the Star Wars.
Right. Right. Star Wars Deadpool.
That person can't be a Jedi. I'll say that for sure. And where are they going to go do it? Who are the bad guys of Star Wars? The Imperials, right? Which is, we talked a lot about Nazi analogs. They're overt Nazis, right? And so it's easy to kill these guys. But who does the Punisher kill? He kills drug dealers and people who murder children and all this stuff. Except for Alderaan being blown up, I don't know if there's any overt children being murdered in Star Wars that we see. That's like apparent, right? And I don't know how this would come about. It seems like it's too dark of a story to tread when it comes to Star Wars. Am I too far off base there, Carter?
Well, your answer about the Acolyte's certainly right, in that we're getting a dark side show from the perspective of dark side Force users, and we're going to be rooting for them. Now, again, not sure if that's an anti-hero thing or if it's just we're seeing the story told from the villain's perspective, which is an extremely important distinction that people definitely have to realize. It's like, Casty and I are watching this through The Sopranos right now. You root for Tony Soprano, obviously. You're like, you want good things to happen to this guy. He is a villain. Like, he's not an anti-hero. Oh, Tony's not rich or stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. That guy's a mobster. He's a bad guy. I mean, it's a great show because the lines are so blurred and you're so like, oh man, I hate that Tony's having these problems with his kids where you just watched him kill somebody like 10 minutes ago. So that's really good storytelling. This isn't a knock on The Sopranos. It is a knock on people who would watch The Sopranos and be like, I want to grow up and be like Tony Soprano. And it's like, yeah, there's a problem there if you say something like that. Yeah. But for a Star Wars anti-hero show, the most natural direction is something like Bounty Hunters or something like the Underworld, right? And so I'd say we've gotten touches of the Star Wars anti-hero. Solo, you might say, was like that. The first season of The Mandalorian, you might say, was like that, where we're following these characters who, they aren't in it for altruistic reasons. They're in it for themselves. We just recently got the report that James Mangold's Boba Fett film that he was working on a few years ago got scrapped, but that it was borderline R-rated, and it was not going to take the same direction they took in the Book of Boba Fett show. And so that one likely would have been almost exactly what you're asking about, in that we would have gotten an anti-hero Boba Fett. Boba Fett would have been doing something good, probably for money. And he would have been doing the good for the money, not for the good. And I think that would have been the closest. But we'll get an anti-hero thing soon. We'll get an anti-hero thing eventually. We get those kinds of stories out of Star Wars all the time with the smugglers and the underworld and the bounty hunters. And so the next big underworld story we tell will be that. I think the Star Wars Outlaws video game is likely. She is going to be an anti-hero. that lead character, her name is escaping me, she will certainly be an anti-hero. I'm almost positive. And so for a show, I'll say it's a matter of time, but I wouldn't say that anything on the horizon is overtly an anti-hero thing yet, just because the Acolyte is much more likely you're following villains. Like, it's told from their perspective, and so you're going to sympathize with them, and you're going to have empathy with them, but that doesn't make them anti-heroes.
Right.
That would be my assessment.
Yeah, you got to be clear on what a definition of an anti-hero is. An anti-hero, from my perspective, is somebody who does bad things for noble reasons. You know, this drug dealer has to die so he stops doing drugs. But you're committing a murder for those ends, regardless of what that guy's stuff is. So like a mercenary, it's almost not there. I mean, he's in it for the money, and he could do good things, but he's not, is he doing a bad thing to accomplish a good task? I mean, maybe. But that's what I'm saying about who are, you have bad guys on one side of Star Wars of the Imperials, and then there's gangsters and stuff. Who's hunting the gangsters? Boba Fett is.
Right.
So I guess that's a good answer.
Thanks. All right, Colin, that wraps up our How the Force Works question. Loaf, we definitely appreciate it, and we appreciate all of our patrons who submit questions for that segment. But now it is time for us to hop into the much-loved HoloNet news segment.
You made the HoloNet.
Colin, our first HoloNet news is a pretty exciting news story, and that is that Andor has begun filming at a location that we've seen before in the Star Wars universe. George Lucas filmed The Phantom Menace here. He filmed some scenes for Naboo, and this location is Hever Castle. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Hever, Hever, Castle. But as I said, it was used for Naboo scenes in The Phantom Menace, so I can only imagine what they're using it for Andor.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy to think about. That's in London, England. And I thought they were finished wrapping up filming on this. But I guess we're at the tail end of it. That could have been my misconception. But yeah, what does this mean? That's going to be kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is going to be extremely crazy. I'm really, really excited to see what it means. I hope that we're going to see some shots on Naboo, because I've loved, through the first season of Andor, the tie between the prequels and between the original trilogy, that I think adding some prequel locations is going to deepen even more.
Exactly right. That's going to be so exciting to see.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So our second news story, Colin, is one that is also really, really exciting and one that deserves talking about, and that is that Star Wars Eclipse, the video game that famously released a trailer years ago and then went radio silence until last week, has said that they are still in production, they're still making the game, it did not get canceled, and that they're aiming for a 2026 release date.
Yeah, 2026. That sounds about right to make a game of that scale. It's kind of weird. They said they didn't know what it's about yet. So it makes me wonder what they're doing in there for that amount of time. The last time we brought the news, I think that's what they said. But what that means to me is they got a bunch of art assets, because that's one of the most time-consuming things is between the art and the animation. The story, making that stuff, and how the players are going to interact with the game, that's a relatively small aspect. I would think. I'm not a game designer, but I'm real interested to see. I'm excited to play this game, any Star Wars game, and just to have a bunch of fun with that, fun with you, fun with it on stream. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I am too. It's going to be good. I mean, I'm already super, super excited about it, and so it's going to be a lot of fun when it does finally roll around. So one of our last news story of the day is one for our High Republic reader listeners out there. They're going to be super excited to hear that as we were recording this, StarWars.com went live and revealed the new cover for the first adult novel in the last phase of the High Republic series, Phase 3. This novel is called The Eye of Darkness, and the cover's got Marchion Ro sitting down at his throne, wielding Loden Greatstorm's lightsaber, and so there's a lot going on there, and it's really, really, it looks really cool, and it's going to be really fun. So this is just building up the hype rolling into the High Republic Phase 3.
Yeah, man, that cover looks amazing. I don't know anything about those characters yet. I really need to read these books, but gosh, that looks cool.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it looks neat, and I'm really excited. We don't know exactly what this is going to be about or what it's going to be like, but I know that it is widely anticipated by everybody who has been reading these books. That Phase 3, it has a lot to do. It has a lot to wrap up, but if they do well, this is quickly going to become one of the best eras in Star Wars.
Oh yeah, that sounds so fun. I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, me neither. But, Colin, I think that wraps up our HoloNet news. It was a short little segment, but that's fine because it's going to allow us to head right into our next segment, which is Star Wars Moment of the Week.
We would be honored if you would join us.
So, Colin, what was your Star Wars Moment of the Week?
So, in working with Warhammer Station, I needed to back up a lot of my projects I've been working on. I've been trying to put out a video every day. It's a task to keep everything all in focus and all that stuff. And so I pulled out a hard drive. A portable hard drive I haven't touched in a really long time. And I discovered a cache of pictures that go all the way back to 2007. And Carter, just to prove, I can share this one with you at some point so we can post it. To prove that I'm a big of a Star Wars fan as anybody out there, my grandmother-in-law, I think she made for me a brown Jedi robe. My wife or girlfriend at the time told her relatives how much I was into Star Wars and made a brown Jedi robe for me. So there's a couple of different pictures of me wearing the robe and holding a blue lightsaber, just same as Obi-Wan would. And, I figured out how to share this with all our listeners and Instagram viewers out there. But yeah, how old were you in 2007, Carter? 8?
No, I was 9. I was 9.
Yeah, 9 years old. So, yeah, and I'm in my apartment just hanging out, with doing Star Wars stuff. All the way back then, I wish I could go back to something like in the 80s or whatever, but it's a lot of fun, very fond memories thinking stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that is. I mean, I can't wait to look back on stuff like that, and it's always fun when you're able to look back on stuff like that and see how long you've been dealing with Star Wars and doing stuff with Star Wars. So my Star Wars moment of the week is kind of small, and it happened to me yesterday, actually. So I'm on vacation right now in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, and so while I'm on vacation, we're hanging out, walking around down Pagosa Springs, and I find a bookstore, so obviously I have to go in. So I'm walking around looking at this bookstore, and I come across a Star Wars book that I'd never seen before that I thought I would have come across, but I never had. And so it was a super rare treat to be able to find something just sitting in a bookstore that I didn't have any idea about. And that is the memoir written by Bill Kimberlin, who was a director at at Industrial Light and Magic. His book is called Inside the Star Wars Empire, and it's all these short stories and anecdotes and tales of his time at ILM. And so I've come in and I've just started it, but the very first stories are already rolling with tales about George and his dreams for special effects and founding this brand new, groundbreaking special effects studio. And so getting to read from somebody who was there on the ground and knew George Lucas while these movies were being developed has been a real treat, and I cannot wait to get through the rest of the book.
Well, that sounds amazing. I saw you make that Instagram post.
Yes, yeah. I asked our Instagram followers if I should get it or not, and we got 339 say I should get it, and like 10 say that I shouldn't. So I ended up getting it.
So what little you've read, is it good so far? I mean, you flipped through it. I mean, and you obviously bought it. It's cool, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's all these anecdotes and stories of time at ILM that you can only hear from these kinds of people. And so Bill Kimberlin does a really good job of the short part that I've read of characterizing George and talking about George's thought process at the time and just delivering what George was thinking then. And so it's really, really good to get to some behind-the-scenes Star Wars action.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool.
We need to find one for Indiana Jones, too.
Yeah, we definitely do. We definitely do. All right, Colin. Well, that wraps up our Star Wars moment of the week. Subsequently, wrapping up our podcast this week. We had a blast bringing this episode to you guys. We love Indy. We love Indiana Jones. You know, Star Wars fans are always apt to be Jones fans. And so we hope that this break from our regularly scheduled Star Wars content was welcomed by our listeners. We hope that you guys enjoyed this. And we hope that you guys are going to go check out Dial of Destiny because we loved it.
Yeah. And you know, gosh, there's so much to love about it. You know, I kind of doubt they're going to make another one. Do you think? Is there going to be an Indiana Jones 6?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, Helena Shaw could could assume that role if she wanted. But Indy's a character that I would like to see retire, that I would like to see, you know, it's over with 5 movies. You know, they were talking about doing a show, and that's been pulled. Bob Iger said they want Lucasfilm to only focus on Star Wars, which is probably a smart business decision, and obviously we're not going to be complaining. We're huge Star Wars fans. And so I don't think that we're getting any more Indy. I think this is it. I think that this was our last hurrah with Harrison on screen and with what Indiana Jones is, and I think that this was a fine send-off for our beloved character.
I think if there's anything, he could be like a mentor to somebody. You know, like what was that old TV show, Charlie's Angels? You have the voice on the phone or something like that. I'd like to have somebody check in with Indiana Jones. But then you have to recast. I don't know. Harrison's not something you can put in something just casually, right?
Well, you're not going to get Ford on TV. I mean, he's just not a TV actor. He's just going to say no. They were lucky to get him in that one episode of Young Indiana Jones Chronicles.
Yeah. And that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was before he was a way bigger movie star than he is now. I mean, he was already Titanic then, but come on. So that wraps it up for us this week, Colin. We appreciate everybody listening. If you've listened this far, you must be a fan of the podcast, and so please leave us a 5-star review. They help us the most of anything you can do for us. 5 stars over on Apple, 5 stars over on Spotify, likes, comments, subscriptions over on YouTube. All of it helps us grow, helps us build this community, helps us build our listener base. And if you really want to be a part of the community, you really want to dive in, we have a bunch of ways to do that. We've got a Facebook group, Star Wars Station Cantina. We've got a Discord, Star Wars Station. Colin and I can occasionally be found on Twitch over at twitch.tv/stationmedia. You can
I'm trying to get more
Twitter.
stuff on there. I might be painting some models on Twitch.
Good. Well, I'm happy to hear that. I don't know how many podcasts in a row we've heard that there might be models painting it on Twitch, but eventually it's going to be super cool.
It's not one thing, it's another. That's the plan. That's the plan.
So we're super excited about Twitch. We love our Instagram, StarWars.station. Check out the memes over there. On Indie Day, we did an indie meme takeover. It was a lot of fun. We're also over on Twitter at SW_station if you want to see all of our flaming hot takes in real time. And other than that, the number one way that you can support us is head on over at patreon.com/Star Wars Station. We've got bukus of awards there, of tier rewards there. You can listen to our RPG for only $2. You can be on our close friends' Instagram story for only $1 a month. You can get t-shirts. You can ask questions. You can be on the show. You can be on other shows that we have on Patreon. You can have access to other shows that we make patron exclusive. And so there are all kinds of special things being rolled out for patrons. If you liked that Mark Thompson interview last week, it's video only over on patreon.com. So if you want to see Mark react and the way he points out different things, all you got to do is head over to patreon.com/Star Wars Station and find the tier level that fits for you, because that video is available at every tier level. So any tier level you want, you'll be able to see that exclusive video interview with Mark Thompson. Colin, what else are we working on?
Oh gosh, Warhammer Station, it's kicking off. Like I said, I try and put out a video every day. The views and the subscribers just going up and up and up. Warhammer in itself just released a new edition. And things are really elevating across the board with this Warhammer aspect of, the whole Station Media project. And so much other stuff is in the works. And if you want to be part of this, right now is the best time to latch your boat onto this rising tide machine.
Absolutely. You gotta get it on the ground floor because you don't want to miss any of where we're headed. So we appreciate all you guys very, very much for listening to us, for helping us in every way possible. We thank you guys so very, very much for your continued support, and we can't wait to keep bringing this Star Wars podcast to you. But until next week, please stay wizard.